Hey everyone, CWD Music here. I'm CWD, and this is going to be a music review of the Kendrick Lamar album, Damn! Kendrick Lamar is a rapper from Compton, California, who, within the short period of time of his career, or at least in his career of putting out studio records, he's established himself as a very prominent force in hip-hop. Within just 4 albums, he has left a mark on the face of hip-hop to come, and quite frankly has established himself as most likely the greatest rapper of this generation. From his ability to switch up flows in the midst of entire bars and lines and all that, from his very well thought out, intricate, at times sort of verbose in its own right lyricism, and his just ability to establish a sort of concept throughout a song or record, he's without a doubt going to go down as not just one of the greats in hip-hop, but one of the greatest artists to ever live. He's best known for albums like Good Kid, Mad City and To Pimp a Butterfly, and both of which are story albums, but told differently, albeit they're both linear in their own respective style. Good Kid, Mad City was blatantly a story album. It was blatantly sort of a short film of sorts, whereas To Pimp a Butterfly told a linear story within a series of vignettes of sorts, both of which seem to be touching down on subjects like race, police brutality, religion, love, death, drugs. There were definitely quite a bit of things that Kendrick wanted to tackle within the course of at least an hour's worth of music. Last year he dropped a EP/mini album of sorts called Untitled Unmastered, an album that I reviewed last year on my channel, and I didn't love it at the time, but it grew on me with more and more listens. Plus, when I thought about this one unpolished piece of art with just 8 tracks on it with no names, in the context of every other rap artist projects, it was just remarkable how well done this one album is in comparison to all those. A short little EP of 8 tracks that isn't mixed very well is phenomenally better than some serious major full-length projects from serious and otherwise rappers. So at the time when Damn came out, I was definitely looking forward to listening to the album. It's kind of unfortunate that I was unable to review it at the time, but no time better than the present for sure, because this was an album that ended up being a favorite of mine for the year, and will still go down as a favorite of mine for the year. Looking at this album in the context of Kendrick Lamar's other albums, I don't love this as much as To Pimp a Butterfly. I just kind of see it going toe-to-toe with Good Kid, Mad City, and it is for sure better than Section 80 and Untitled Unmastered. This album is about 54 minutes long. It's 14 tracks. A good chunk of this album, in terms of production, is pretty interesting. A lot of the beats, while some of them go into a more trap and hard-hitting vein, some of them go for a more abstract and kind of trippy type of vibe to it. Where you have tracks like Humble, Loyalty, and DNA, where it has a nice, catchy, sort of trap vibe to it that is pretty hard-hitting in its own right. You do have tracks like Lust, Pride, and Ya that go for a more mid-paced and psychedelic vibe in a sense. Lust actually goes for a more jazzy and pretty alarming vibe to it, but with the Bad Bad Not Good production feature on this thing. In terms of who is who in terms of production on this album, there's quite a few to name here. You have Mike Will Made It, who is in a lot of ways the unsung hero of this record, given the fact that he's produced 3 of the greatest tracks on the album, DNA, Humble, and Triple X. Ninth Wonder produces the closing track. The Alchemist produced Sphere. Bad Bad Not Good does the production on the track Lust, like I've mentioned. The track Element has production from James Blake, who is credited as J Blake, but Let's be honest, we know who that is. Of course, you have the usual suspects. Soundwave is on this record. DJ Dahi is on this record. Pretty much, if you're a producer that is worth your salt, you will want to work with Kendrick Lamar ASAP. What's cool about the tracks as a whole in terms of production is that, yes, they have their own flavor to them, but they also seem to emphasize each individual point or story that Kendrick is trying to convey, in a sense. The only beats I don't really care all that much for are the tracks God and Love. God, it's okay, it's not a fantastic beat, but it serves its purpose, sort of, kind of creating a sort of awe-inspiring grandeur. It doesn't really do that all that well, or as well as it could have, but regardless, it's a serviceable beat. And Love is pretty dime a dozen in a sense, albeit really pretty and heartfelt, especially with the content of the record. What's interesting about this record is that there's not really a consistent production vibe to each individual track. And in a sense, conceptually, in terms of lyrics and production, this is easily Kendrick Lamar's most inconsistent in terms of concept. But the album still ended up really good, so that's not really a huge complaint I have about the record. So for the most part, the beats are great. DNA is hard-hitting as hell, and I love that beat switch that happens after the Geraldo sample that's in it. The track element has gotten a lot of comparisons from the Drake song Energy, I believe. I don't really fully see the comparison, but I see the similarities there. Tracks like Feelin' Pride have sort of a mid-paced vibe to it. Humble is easily one of the greatest singles of the year for sure. Mike Will Made is a genius. I believe he actually made this song for Gucci Mane last I did research, but with Kendrick doing this, it seems a lot more fitting. Tracks like XXX and Duckworth have quite a few beat switches in a sense. Duckworth in itself highlights Ninth Wonder's genius as he pretty much creates a beat that doesn't stay the same throughout the course of the track. It just keeps evolving and morphing in its own way, and somehow Kendrick is able to keep up and just adapt with this beat, which makes him just... Whenever I hear Kendrick doing things like this, I just kind of fanboy out in a sense, because there's very few rappers like him that's able to do something of this nature. So for the most part, I do dig the production. I wish there was more cohesive throughout, but regardless, I think some of the production, a good chunk of the production on this album, is some of the best beats that Kendrick Lamar has ever worked with. Now, what about the lyrics and concept to this record, the big selling point of a lot of Kendrick's music? Well, let's try to go through this track by track by track. The opening track, Blood, is a sort of intro where there's this song vocal that asks, is it wickedness or is it weakness? Are we going to live or are we going to die? In which case Kendrick is highlighting that he was taking a walk one day and he saw this blind woman really frustrated trying to look for something, and Kendrick decides to go ahead and try to lend a helping hand, but in turn the woman then says that Kendrick has lost something, and that is his life, and the track ends with a gunshot, along with a sample of Fox News talking about the track Alright. DNA is both in terms brag rap and kind of alarming rap in a sense. I haven't fully digested what Kendrick talks about with the song DNA, but it certainly highlights a lot of good things and bad things that happens to be inherited within the average DNA in a sense. He also talks about royalty, he also talks about troublesome heart, sort of highlighting, I guess, all the different things that's going to be thrown all over the course of the album. Not just success and happiness, but also fear and sort of sinfulness all throughout Kendrick's life in a sense. The track Yeah, he seems to reference the fact that Geraldo called him out on the song Alright. He's talking about how he's not a politician, he's not actually about any religion. I'm an Israelite, don't call me black no more. Or it is only a color, it ain't facts no more. In which case he talks about this sort of cognitive dissonance between staying spiritual but still living a sort of materialistic lifestyle, where he says that he knows that God walks the earth, but there's money to get, bitches to hit, yeah. The track Element, I think, being about Kendrick Lamar being thrown out of the environment that he is comfortable in, but if he's got to go ahead and confront people, that he's going to make it look sexy. The track Feel being about how he wonders if people actually care about him. Sure, people care about if Kendrick Lamar is putting out music or not, but are they actually really caring about the man himself? He feels like that no one is praying for him, and that seems to be a running refrain throughout the course of the album. Kendrick's worry about whether or not people actually love him or wonder if he's doing alright. The track Loyalty is probably the most basic and standard in terms of lyricism. It seems pretty self-explanatory. It's about loyalty and, you know, who you're loyal to and whether or not loyalty actually matters to you or not. The track Pride, I haven't fully figured out. I do think that the track is about the self-esteem angle that was hinted with To Pimp a Butterfly. He also talks about how he doesn't really have much faith in human beings in a sense, since he notes how untrustworthy humans can be, and he notes that he can't fake humble just because your ass is insecure. And the track Humble is pretty interesting. In context of the record, it's more so about, again, cognitive dissonance between being braggadocious and pretty upfront with people, but also simultaneously trying to stay humble without compromising yourself. And the track Lust is really interesting. It's about being a slave to routine. What Kendrick does on this track is he takes like the opening verse and then starts it from the beginning again, stops at a certain point, then starts from the beginning again, let it ride, and then stops and then starts a very similar verse from the beginning, as if it's like, okay, yeah, you're just a slave to routine, and no matter if anything like super bad happens, you're still going to get back up and do the same thing over and over again. He notes that when Donald Trump was elected, everyone went out into the streets and protested, but after that died down, it was like back to the old ways. The track Love, again, one of the more basic and simple lyrical sentiments, although I do like this one a lot more than Loyalty. It's a honest-to-God love song, and it's not really sappy or simpish at all, and that's what I dig about this track quite a bit. Whoever Kendrick's girlfriend or fiance is, y'all need to get married already if you haven't yet. The track Triple X is pretty interesting. It seems to be about, again, more cognitive dissonance between trying to be a peaceful and non-violent person when it comes to protesting, whereas it's also about being in a situation where you have to defend yourself or your family or someone that you're really close to, which may require legitimate violence. In which case, there's like a verse where he talks about how if someone touches someone Kendrick cares about, chances are that person's going to get killed. One of the very interesting and mind-blowing things that helped me realize what this track is about is that at the very tail end of this verse, he talks about speaking at this convention, and then there's like a spoken word bit where he's like, alright kids, we're going to talk about gun control. By the way, I do want to mention the features on this album, the guest vocals on this album. Rihanna is on Loyalty, and she does pretty well. I thought it was interesting that she was doing more of a sing-rap cadence type thing, which I love a lot. I actually ended up liking that feature even if the track wasn't one of my favorites. Love features a vocalist named Zakari, and he has a really beautiful voice. And it really fits the whole lovey-dovey sort of vibe that the track is going for. And Triple X that has U2 of all people on it. When I saw that U2 was featured on this album, I was scared. Don't get me wrong, I love U2. U2 is one of my favorite bands of all time. But seeing U2 on a rap album had me skeptical and confused as to what would happen. And turns out, it worked. Because on this track there's a beat switch that goes for a more, I guess, really seedy and sort of mischievous sort of beat switch going on. And Bono's voice guides perfectly on this part of the track. And then you have the track Fear, which is about fear, or at least the development and sort of living in fear, in a sense. In which case, the first verse talks about how Kendrick initially developed fear from his mother threatening to punish him physically whenever he did anything wrong or supposedly wrong. In which case, the second verse talks about how Kendrick is a teenager or a young adult and he fears about all these things that could probably kill him. In which case, he says that he'll probably die in a various amounts of ways. He'll probably die in the middle of an argument, he'll probably die just walking from the store. He could potentially die at any moment whatsoever, and he feels fearful of that. At the age of 27, he is fearful of being judged. He doesn't have to fear going broke and living back in Section 80, living with his mother. He doesn't have to fear any of that anymore. He fears being judged. He fears being critiqued negatively, in a sense. And then he wonders if all this time, if he's living through fear or if he's living through rap. Is he actually living the life of a rapper, or is he living the life of someone that is just afraid of what is to come? A lot of people seem to suggest that this track talks about how the minorities in America are the black Israelites, and the only way for them to be saved is by going back to the ages of the Old Testament. But I think people grossly misinterpreted that. This isn't Kendrick's point of view. This is his cousin Carl's point of view that's sampled on this track. Let's not confuse the two people. Just because Carl is saying these things, it doesn't necessarily mean that Kendrick is accepting and agreeing with this point of view. It's just a point of view that seems to have been prevalent in a while and hasn't really solved any problems with this particular sort of fear, if that makes any sense. And the track God, I'm not going to get too much into, since it's again another kind of basic sort of lyrical sentiment about sort of what God feels like. I'm not 100% sure if it's satire or not, and I think it is, especially given the simplicity of the track, but still, I mean, I get it. It's about being sort of high up and wondering if this is exactly what God feels like. And the track Duckworth is fantastic in terms of storytelling. Kendrick pretty much tells the story about how Top Dog and his dad ended up meeting, and how it's so funny that all because his dad gave Top Dog some free chicken and extra biscuits, they ended up with giving studio time to one of the greatest rappers to ever exist. Whereas if this didn't happen, it was likely that Ducky would be shot to death, Top Dog would be serving life in prison, and Kendrick would grow up without a father and die somewhere in a gunfight. Which is wild. And then the track ends with the whole album being like sped up in reverse, which suggested to a lot of people that the album can be played backwards and frontwards. Not in terms of like, you know, backmasking and all that, but like the track sequencing going in reverse. So, and these are raw thoughts, so you'll have to be patient with me for a minute. The tracks would then go from track 14 to track 1 versus track 1 to track 14. Which, when you think about it, does tell a completely different story, in a sense. Instead of someone that is living through fear, you have someone that's living through what I guess Kendrick would say rap. In which case, Duckworth would be one of the greatest intro tracks of hip-hop history, for one, but also telling the coming up story of Kendrick Lamar. In which case, it would go into God, and I guess it would put him at a place where he's like, I'm up here now, I'm not down there anymore. In which case, fear would be him being warned of the lifestyle that Kendrick is living. Triple X being about sort of the environment that Kendrick is noticing. Love being about, well, it would still be love, so that doesn't really change all that much. Lust still, I would assume, being about reverting back to your old ways, but I think when you look at this from track 14 to 1, it tells sort of a Heart of Darkness kind of story, in a sense. Like, you start out completely pure and good, and then you just get thrown all this stuff, like being slave to routine, violence in America, the concept of fear, feeling like that no one actually cares about you, things like that. And it all just accumulates into DNA, where you've accumulated all this other stuff in your DNA, such as loyalty, fear, humbleness, love, violence, and all this other stuff. And it's all in your DNA, and then when you get to blood, you just die. Which is, damn. So I don't know if I will listen to it backwards and frontwards, and then frontwards and backwards in a sense, but looking at it like that is pretty interesting, and it's something that one should consider when listening to this really, really good album, because that's what this album is. Just great. There are like some blemishes with this album that cannot be ignored for sure. You have songs like Loyalty and God especially. I still do not like God in context of the rest of the record. And Love is a track that I do like, but it doesn't really highlight a lot of what the album is about. But simultaneously though, each of these individual tracks play a key part to this sort of concept that Kendrick is going for, sort of about the accumulation of all these things making one damned individual, if that is what he's going for. But as far as like albums go, as far as rap albums goes, at the time this was my favorite rap album of the year, but another record which I'm going to be reviewing at some point ends up being that. But still, if you are looking for a hip-hop album that is intricate, well thought out, with great beats, then look no further than this album. If you're a Kendrick Lamar fan, this is a no-brainer for you. If you want to get into Kendrick Lamar, then surprisingly enough, you would want to check out this record, because it's actually some of his most successful work to date, even if the concept is abstract and really hard to digest at first. Once again, Kendrick Lamar with this album solidifies himself as the greatest rapper of all time, and I'm definitely going to be looking forward to what Kendrick is going to do next. I do hope Kendrick continues being the artist that he is, because with this album, with that album, with Good Kid, Mad City, he is without a doubt one of the most inventive and creative artists to have come up of this decade. This album is a plus 2.5 out of plus 3. Yeah, this was a no-brainer for me in terms of albums that I loved. I just wish that, yeah, again, I was able to review this when it came out at the time, because this was just really good, and I wanted more people to be aware of how good it was at the time. But if you give this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you like this album? Did you dislike this album? What was your reasoning for that? And what should I consider listening to and reviewing next? CW Music here, signing off.